Hello, children. It's time for a super amazing lesson from your favorite teacher, or maybe not, Mr. Lassard. Today we're going to be talking about individualizing your tone and voice in your writing. And if you don't care about that, you should. But if you still don't care about it, then this is just, forget about the tone and voice stuff. This is just some good advice for good writing, which hopefully you all want to be as good as possible at. Just so you know, these are required notes, and there may be a time when I come by and I check to make sure that you have them. So make sure that you have them. So let's be clear on how this can help you, because I know I said on the first slide, you should care about this and it's good advice for writing. But more specifically for this class, this can help you because one of your focus points for now is to learn to use parallel structure and various phrases in order to keep and maintain appropriate tone and voice in one's writing. And so knowing that that's something you're going to be graded on, then you probably want to know how to use tone and voice in your writing. And if you know how to use tone and voice in your writing, then this stuff may be some new kind of more complicated ways of making it just a little bit better in your writing. So we'll go over this entire learning target, the parallel structure, the various phrases, and we'll talk about what it has to do with tone and voice in your writing. So piece of advice number one is show, don't tell when you're writing. And step one to that is getting rid of what I call dead verbs or overused verbs. So if we look at examples that I'm going to give you, verbs that I would consider dead are verbs like is, are, were, am, has, have, had, be, been, look, take, took, make, run, ran, go, went, gone, do, did, came, and come. And the reason that they're dead is because they're verbs that anybody can use them. Everybody does use them all the time. When we're talking, we use them all the time. We don't even think about it. When we read it, they're just those words that we skip over. They don't add any personality to your writing. So here's an example of a telling sentence. Harry Potter was going to Hagrid's hut to have a snack when he ran into his enemy, Draco Malfoy. And really, anybody could write this sentence. He was going to have a snack. He was going to have a snack and he ran, right? Like, okay, when you break it down that way, it just sounds boring. It sounds like, any second grader could have written the sentence that way. What we really want to do is to replace those dead verbs with what we call lively verbs or alive verbs, original imaginative verbs. So you look at how have I used these dead verbs and how can I get rid of them in a way that is going to make what I'm writing more imaginative. So these are verbs that convey action. If you say I was going somewhere, yeah, okay, there's a little bit of action there, but it doesn't really paint a picture. And so you want the action to also be talking about how that thing was done, how going was done, for example. And so if we take the telling example from the left and we rewrite it with lively, original, imaginative verbs, it might sound something like this. Bounding down the castle steps, his stomach lurching with hunger as he imagined the taste of the snacks he would enjoy with his friend Hagrid, Harry skidded to a sudden halt inches from the sneering face of his nemesis, Draco Malfoy. And so, essentially, the ideas in the showing example are the same. Harry's going to his friends to have a snack, and then he runs into his enemy. But in this case, we know that he's bounding down some steps and his stomach is lurching, it's kind of, going forward. He's imagining a bunch of stuff and he's imagining enjoying that stuff. He's skidding to a halt. Draco is sneering at him. We've got a much clearer picture of what's going on, and it really adds a lot of personality or voice to your writing. Nobody's going to write it quite like that. You're the only person who's going to write it that way, and it's going to add voice to it. The one thing that you do need to be careful of is what I call thesaurus alert. So if you're just going into a thesaurus and you're looking for a word to replace a boring word, but you don't actually know what that word means, it's going to be pretty clear. So you do want to only use words that you would actually use if you really thought about it, not words that you only are using because you found them in a book. So be careful of that, because if you're not careful of the source alert, your voice is actually going to suffer. It's not going to be helped in your writing. The other thing that you should do is you should structure your sentences differently. And what I mean by that is, you want to make sure that you've got different kinds of sentences in your writing. So for example, we mostly use subject-verb sentences when we're writing and speaking, which if you look at this example, it says Hermione glared at Ron over the book, which you can see in the picture, right? That's a subject-verb. Hermione is the subject, the verb is glaring. It's fine, but if you write all of your sentences like that, it gets a little repetitive. So here are some other options for you. You can reverse some of the sentences. So if we take that sentence from above, we could reverse it by saying, over her book, Hermione glared at Ron, right? You just take the end and move it to the beginning. And that adds some, personality to your writing. You can also use what we call infinitive phrases as your subject. Infinitive means it's a verb that hasn't been conjugated. So to avoid studying, to avoid is the infinitive verb there. To avoid studying, Harry rested the book on his face, right? So we're describing what he's doing or why he's doing it before we describe what he's doing. You can begin with an adjective. Bored, Ron put off studying by trying to catch a frog in his mouth. So we start off kind of with that feel, with a tone, right? There's tone in that. Bored, Ron put off studying, right? So he's, we're adding some tone there. We can begin with an adverb, which is a descriptive word for a verb. So grumpily describes how she's continuing reading. Grumpily, Hermione continued reading. And so that's another way that you can do it. You could say Hermione continued reading grumpily, but then you are back to a subject verb. So we start with the adverb and it helps. You can also start with this last example. You can begin with an ing or an ed, what we call a participial phrase. Participial phrase is essentially an adjective phrase, but you make them by using ing or ed verbs. So in this example, we have having drooled over the page, Harry couldn't read the book anyway. Or frustrated with her friend's apathy, Hermione could hardly focus. So we've got an ing example there and an ed example there, and it's describing how the character is doing something. And so all of those differences will help you add voice and tone to your writing, because only you are going to write it that way. You do also need to consider that you want to have different lengths of sentences. So sometimes you want a long sentence, sometimes you want a medium length sentence, and sometimes you want a short sentence. So that's another way that you can structure your sentences differently. Finally, one last piece of advice that will really help you out, and that has to do with what we call parallel structure. So you use parallel structure when you use the same structure of sentence multiple times. It says when you use the same structure in multiple sentences, this can help add emphasis to important ideas. So for example, sometimes when you use parallel structure, you might use a sentence beginning with an infinitive phrase 2 or 3 times in a row. And we call it parallel because each phrase is paralleling itself. Each sentence is paralleling the one that came before it. And so that'll help add emphasis if you're using the same structure, whether it's reversing or infinitive phrases or adjective or adverb or participial phrase, whatever it is. If you repeat it a couple of times, then you're using parallel structure, and that's to emphasize whatever point you're trying to make. And so you want to try to do that. Up, the last part of your notes is a reflection, or sometimes I'll call it a connection section. And here's a question that you might want to answer as part of your reflection. and that is, which technique do you need to practice the most and why do you need to practice the most? Have a good rest of your day.